Hey folks, this is Waylon Lewis, trying to arrange our Instagram live with Seane Corn, my longtime friend, I won't say old friend, and your brand new book, which I have read, of course, as usual,
He
cover
didn't
to
read
cover.
it. He did not read my book.
I did read most of one chapter, and it was great. It was actually, so not to come off as both ignorant and patronizing,
You were bearing your phone
but it was
right now.
so well written.
Thank
I
you.
was so impressed.
Thank you.
And you actually wrote it.
I actually wrote it. I worked
Yeah.
my tail off on this.
Yeah, you can feel it when you're reading.
Yep.
It's really great.
For anyone who's watching who wants to write a book, here's my advice. Do not do it. Do not write a book. It will suck the life force out of you.
Right, because you're putting your life into it.
Oh my God. My mantra, I swear, my mantra for 3.5 years seemed to be consistently, I don't know what to do next. I would get to a place in the book where I would literally just not know what to do next. And I would just kind of say it out loud, like, I don't know what to do next. Creatively, structurally, on every single level. I'd be like, I'm at the edge of my talent, my skill, my organization, my intelligence. I don't know that next step. But I would always think about yoga. Like, what do you do when you're in a really tough yoga pose? You breathe, you pause, you observe, and you wait. And I would call them the rabbit holes of creative despair. And they would open, and suddenly whatever that problem was, it would get solved. But not through a straight line. It wasn't like someone say, well, here's what you have to do.
Yeah.
There would be all these connectors, and all of a sudden, it could take months and months. I'd be like, holy shit, it happened.
So it worked out.
It
felt like it actually, not just that you finished, but that it went the right way.
But I never, it was very, I don't know how people do this for real, all the time. I spend so much time in my day writing, deleting, pacing, straightening things, eating, isolating, because I never wanted to get too far away from the computer, because I never knew when that moment would come where I'd be like, oh, that word. Do you understand? It's like this?
I do. I mean, as you know, I teach writing and finishing books, and one of the main things I teach about is serialization, which gets you through all of that.
Serialization?
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
You have to take our course.
Oh, I see how it works. Well, I would say
because you're such a natural teacher. You are a teacher. That you could have bruised through this in like 2. You totally could have.
No.
You could have.
Because here's what I'll tell you.
I know you could have.
No, you're wrong. Here's what I know. The first day that I started my book.
I'm wrong in terms of your process that you actually did so well, but you could have done it painlessly.
Well, maybe the next time around, I'll call you up and you can help me. But all I know is the first day that I actually wrote. I took a breath, I said a prayer, and I had all these limiting beliefs just like sitting on my shoulder. And then I started to type, and the information poured through me.
Oh,
I mean, effortlessly.
It
was like the best class I'd ever taught, where I am a vessel, where every sentence was perfect, every paragraph poetry. And I got done with that day, put my computer down, and I'm done. Except that I had around 8,000 words. And I basically wrote a pamphlet. And it was a good pamphlet, but that's all I had.
Right.
I was like, this is it. That wonderful, amazing feeling was the last time I experienced that for the next 3.5 years. The next 3.5 years was trying to figure out how to turn that pamphlet into something that was meaningful, emotional, articulate, more executed. I needed another 90,000 words. And that was tough.
Yeah.
So, if you can help me to get to the place for 3.5 years of just
we should have been in touch. Because the huge obstacle in writing is when you have a good writing session, but it doesn't fit structurally with what you actually want, and then it's actually a good thing is in your way. And the funny thing is, you're such an amazing teacher. Like, you have everything in you to just do this in a month and a half, painlessly.
Right. Well,
And the process you did where you isolated, which is powerful, and I'm so proud of you, and you did something most of us can't do, is that all that struggle is actually totally, you don't have to do it,
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a little late now.
Yeah.
Well, but you know what? It was, though, for me, because for me, the writing of this book was about...
Vanessa, is anyone on Instagram? This has happened repeatedly.
Not really, no.
Yeah, someone needs to be in there so they notice, and it's not just me. All right.
For the process for me was, like, when I wrote this, I knew that I was stepping into a different level of mentorship within my community. When I knew I was going to write a book, I was 48 at that time. It's 5 years ago. And I always believed, what are you looking at?
I'm just looking at the numbers. There's so many people on here.
Oh, there are?
So,
Oh,
yeah.
hi, everyone.
Yeah, Facebook particularly.
Well, when I like, the limiting beliefs that were sitting in me, I knew were the things that were keeping me from actually stepping into my next level of growth. And what I believe when I tell everybody is you have to go towards that which you resist, because there's something that has to be excavated within that, that's going to be a part of your maturation. And so, because I resisted this so much, see, in a classroom, when you're teaching and you're in the flow, I can say something and literally contradict myself in the same sentence.
Totally.
But if I'm so committed to what I'm saying and passionate, people aren't hearing it, they're feeling it.
Yeah.
And so you get away with so much. But
Yeah, but there are contradictions. You know, the Romantics had that idea, two opposite things can both be true at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's how spirituality is sometimes.
But in a book, people can actually Google stuff and hold me to it. And I, just all that stuff in my head that I'm not smart enough, I'm not organized enough, I don't have enough content, it really sat with me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I know none of that is true.
Yeah.
And yet the fact that it was still lingering, I thought, how is this keeping me from truly stepping into where I need to be as a leader in the community? So I knew I had to write this. So the process of writing it was both, on one hand, it's narratives. It's not all narratives. It's 12 chapters of snapshots of my own spiritual maturation, the messy journey of spirit. But in each chapter, there's a subchapter that's me at this age, saying, here's what was actually happening. Here's the tools. Here's the methodology, the philosophy, the science.
Present day you and past.
Where I knew nothing. And yet, at the same time, it was all unfolding. So I had to write the book from two places. One had to be really deeply kind of researched and look at the traditions and try to bring those traditions up to speed in a way that was accessible, especially when it comes to themes like justice and conscious action, which is, if you read the book, is the whole back half of the book.
I do know your actual life and you. No, but I should have read it. But I did read this morning. I think people look at you and you seem quite beautiful yoga teacher, the fabulous hair, but I love that life, the Life restaurant, Life Cafe story for that, because you started off this New Jersey girl, totally broke, right? You didn't even have the money to go to New York.
No.
You like stole the money or whatever. You were working at this crazy cafe with Allen Ginsberg and there's drugs and characters, you know, and yogis and punk rockers.
Yeah.
You came out of this amazing kick-ass world, and through that discovered, you know, your yogi path, your teaching path.
Yeah, again, like, as the book explores, it's just the angels that show up along the way. But I was also straddling two different worlds. When I came to New York, like, when I started writing the book, the first thing that I wrote down, the very first thing, when I had that moment of where I was just channeling, was, my name is Cece. Was the first thing that, it didn't make it into the book, but that's the first thing I wrote, and that really freaked me out because A, my name is Sean, but my family calls me Cece. That's my childhood name. It has a different, I have a different relationship to that name, and when I wrote that, the first thing, I got really scared because as Sean, I have an identity, and I can stand behind that identity. I'm a teacher. I have mentorship. I have wisdom of 53 years. There's things that I can wear it like a really generous cloak, and I can tell you how I feel without actually having to show it. But Cece didn't have mentorship. She had drugs and alcohol. She had anxiety. She had childhood trauma. She had obsessive-compulsive disorder, issues with cutting. She was also fun as all hell, and I hate talking about myself in third person. It's weird, but nonetheless.
But you're talking about that identity.
Yes. Yeah. So when I wrote My Name is Cece, that scared me because I knew I was going to have to write the book from a place not of authority, but as intimacy. But that's everything. That makes the book tolerable and actually helpful to people instead of this top-down thing. Because you're vulnerable. But how dare I invite people to look at their narratives, reframe their narratives, see a bigger spiritual picture to why things happen as they do, turn their pain into purpose, if I'm not willing to show them what it looks like and how messy and uncomfortable it is, and not just stuff that happened 30 years ago. My last chapter, or the second to last chapter, is dealing with internalized racism that just happened a few years ago. And even with all the tools, with all the information, with all the skills, when you're holding in your body ancestral, cultural, generational trauma and information related to bias and prejudice, et cetera, that doesn't go away in 2 seconds. I inherited my curly hair, I inherit my bias. And so the book...
culturally, we teach and we pass along that bias without even wanting to half the time.
And that's what I wanted to show in the book. Like, this is what it looks like, and this is what it looks like to normalize it and to take accountability for it. And here's how it connects back to the ancient teachings. This is not incongruent. It's actually 100% completely in alignment. And...
Well, prejudging, like from the Buddhist tradition, that's the whole enchilada, right? You're putting your judgments over reality, and the whole path is to, become present with reality.
Yes.
So you can see all your neuroses or prejudgments, but not buy into them.
But also be in relationship with them, and not as if, like, suddenly I do a couple yoga poses and now I'm free of all my bias and prejudice. Unless we're enlightened, which odds are it's not going to happen in our lifetime, but things are going to come up, especially when our reactive mind gets activated and we're not really in present time. My fear might move me in a direction that even unintentionally creates harm and suffering and more separation. I need to be able to anticipate this as a reality and be able to stand with it and be like, oh, there's my prejudice, there's my racism, my sexism, my homophobia. Before I say another word, let me ground and breathe and pause before I make a choice that's actually harmful. And so it's not as if it all gets eradicated, but yoga teaches us how to be in relationship. That's yoga, with all of it. And that's...
Yeah, yoking yoga, right.
So the shadow and the light.
So you mentioned we were going to talk about a chapter that connects with how to breathe, which you're already touching on, and how you worked with anxiety and obsessive-compulsive disorder.
Yeah, well, I have to set a little context for it, because,
Please.
So this is early on. When I moved to New York City, like I said, I had childhood trauma, and I talk about it freely in the book. I've been talking about it freely for years, but in the book, obviously, I unpack it in a really big way. There you go.
There's the book.
And the first part of the book is the evolution of the soul, and that's really the individual journey. The second part is the revolution, and that's looking at it in a broader context. And so I experienced childhood trauma, and my reaction to that as a way to self-soothe or self-regulate before I had access to drugs and alcohol is that I became obsessive in my thoughts, especially related to God. I was an atheist, but I picked up a lot of information in my environment in school that God was this punishing thing. And so I was always afraid that if I messed up or if I did something bad, that God would really take my parents away, And so I would...
While being atheist, that's how you felt.
Yeah, I was a child. I didn't really understand anything.
Right.
I rejected this thing. At the same time, I was terrified of it.
Right.
And so whenever I would get anxious, I would... what I called at that time pattern, and I was obsessed with 4s and 8s. So I would touch things in numbers of 4s or 8s, blink, swallow. If you told me that you loved me, I'd have to hear it 4 times. And if you didn't do these things, my body would feel very out of balance, and that would cause incredible anxiety. And again, related to childhood trauma, my tension was a way to create control. And so that the sensation of anxiety, I was always looking for ways to find balance. And when a world was out of order, this was my way of creating order. So...
it sounds kind of good. Like, what's the downside to it? Because, like, in meditation practice, that's sort of what you're doing.
Yeah, there's
Hopefully
a lot.
it's not too tight.
There's a lot of downsides.
No, forgive the ignorant question, but, like, where does the problem... Is just so tight, or...
Which, the contraction?
I don't know, trying to bring order to a crazy world when you're a child.
When there's trauma associated with it, trauma is anything that overwhelms your capacity to cope and leaves you feeling helpless, hopeless, out of control, or unable to respond. And when you experience trauma, your body contracts in order to create a moment of safety.
Right.
And so that narrative is now imprinted in the body, that whatever that trauma is lives here. So to release that tension, in my mind, or in anyone who's experienced trauma, there's no evidence that that's safe. To release that tension could mean violence, could mean death, it could mean all sorts of things.
Right.
So we get addicted to this tension.
Because that's safety.
Yes. And so, but as a kid, that energy needs to get discharged. Instead, it's suppressed. And so I held on to a lot of suppressed fear, rage, anger, shame, guilt. And I wasn't conscious of any of this, obviously. I was a kid. And so my way to deal with the overwhelm I felt was to try to create order in my life and through patterning. And this, it was just a way to self-soothe. When I discovered drugs and alcohol, that became another way to self-soothe. And then I moved to New York City very, very young. And when I left my family, especially my mother, who was my main source of comfort, the anxiety would get worse and my patterning got worse. And so in this particular chapter, I share that every day I lived on the 4th floor of a walk-up and would count the 56 steps every day, lock the door. I'd lock the door first, count the steps, and I'd have to turn around, count the steps up, check the lock to make sure it was locked. And I'd have to do this 4 times, even though, of course it's locked. I know it's locked, doesn't matter. And so that's when I had already just started yoga, but yoga wasn't a spiritual practice for me at all. It was just physical. But I started to get glimmers of contentment, little glimmers of it. And in that process, started giving up drugs and alcohol and smoking and meat. Those things just started to fall away. Because when I moved to New York City, I was, besides working in nightclubs and partying and all that, I also worked at Life Cafe. And that's when I met David and Sharon, and that's how I learned about yoga. So I'm, on one hand, Cece is partying her ass off. On the other hand, Sean is starting to awaken. And the other part of me that would eventually develop an identity around yoga. So I was living in those two worlds. And so what happened is that I start seeing a therapist because my anxiety is getting worse, especially because now I'm not drinking as much. And my therapist teaches me about trauma. And nobody's talking about it. I don't associate what happened to me as a kid as trauma. I know now, of course it was. I had, again, no education around it.
Right.
And so I'm open to investigating what this looks like. And what happened was, I'm in a yoga class, and the teacher walks by me, I'm in downward dog, and kicks my right foot. And as soon as he hit my foot, the anxiety triggered in my body.
To correct your
No, just accidentally.
posture? Oh, just accidentally.
Accidentally hit my foot. But as soon as the teacher did, the anxiety in my body went right up, and I needed him to touch my other foot. And I start to obsess in my head about how am I going to get him to touch, to hit the opposite foot so he puts my body back in balance. And I'd spent my life tripping over people, finding creative ways to balance myself out. And so, but now if you looked at me, you wouldn't know, because I was also the queen of dissociation, so that you could never see what was playing out. So I'm obsessing, and the superstitions are coming up, because if he doesn't kick my foot, something bad's going to happen. And then the teacher says, breathe and everything changes. And I took this deep breath, exhaled, nothing changed. I took another deep breath, nothing changed. Another one, and the anxiety actually got worse. Another one, and I don't know if it was the 5th breath or the 10th breath, but there's a moment when the anxiety decreased. I got through the practice, and I was able to leave the studio without having to accost the teacher. And then the next morning, I leave my apartment, I lock the door, I count the 56 steps down, and I go to turn to go back up the stairs, and I stop. I remember what had happened the day before. I sat down at the bottom step, and I breathed and breathed, and it was painful. I mean, the anxiety was so bad, and I knew I could fix it if I just went up the fucking stairs.
Right.
I just knew it would.
Because that was your way to relate to that tension.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I knew it would just be like Band-Aid would be on the wound. And I just kept that mantra in my head, breathe and everything changes, breathe and everything changes. And there was a moment. I sat on those steps for I don't even know how long. But there was a moment it shifted and I was able to leave the building and get on with my day. So this became my practice, but I didn't get to the core of how that tension got there in the first place. That's not until chapter 5. And so...
I'll read it.
Yes, and that really unpacks like what was actually living in my body that needed to be addressed. But the thing about these practices, they titrate your nervous system.
Titrate?
Meaning that they prepare it. I couldn't handle chapter 5 when I was 17 years old.
It's like a massage. You don't get into the core, but you can loosen up what's blocking getting down there.
The book explores like the pathway. Like first it's physical. For me, first yoga class I puked, and I was just purifying. And then it started to become more emotional. And as that happened, new insights came up. It was like once the physical tension felt safe enough to release, it was like, okay, now we can go in. And that's when the work got even more complex and more magnificent.
Whew. Well, that was amazing. And so for many more stories like that, we can read the book.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I guess my only question around that would be, it seems like our ego, which isn't an evil thing, we can make friends with it, but it uses everything, including spirituality or meditation or breath. But it sounds like your obsessiveness didn't count the breaths, it didn't use the breaths or misuse the breathing. That you actually just use the breath to relate to itself, to the present moment, to relax.
And it's funny that you're saying that because the old me is just like, oh my God, I missed that.
What an opportunity.
Yes.
Count 4
I could
breaths.
have counted the fucking breaths.
But you didn't.
No.
You actually related to the breath just directly and fully.
Yeah.
And nothing happened, something happened,
And it was just such a relief for anyone who struggled with obsessive-compulsive disorder knows, like, to have those moments. Obsessive-compulsive disorder, now, of course, it lives on a spectrum. There's obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, which I do not have, which is different. A lot of people have obsessive-compulsive disorder, but again, it lives on that, it lives in that spectrum. But it's, to me, it was not a mental disorder. It was an emotional response to trauma.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important to distinguish because people who have obsessive-compulsive disorder, there's shame around it. They think that there's some kind of a chemical imbalance perhaps. Now for some there might be. But for many, they might also find that it's a very clever survival mechanism that people who've experienced trauma utilize to feel better in their bodies. It's just that when you get to become an adult, it just doesn't work anymore. And that there are other ways in which we can...
It makes it worse, almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's got to be ways in which we can find that we can actually work with it and understand it. And when I was writing the book, because there's so much anxiety that came up for me in the book, because I was dealing so much with childhood trauma, and having to unpack that again after all these years and write about it in present time. And it was traumatizing. So I had to spend a lot of time in therapy. And it kicked up some of the old obsessive-compulsive behaviors.
Wow.
Which I hadn't really experienced in a long time. And but it was a really good thing because I used it this time as a way, it was almost an indicator. It was like my body's way of saying, honey, you're scared, you're overwhelmed, you're sad, you're enraged. Let's address the emotions that you're feeling, but you're not connecting with because of my dissociation.
Yeah, you've got the 53-year-old you who has perspective. The scared you is looking at the old tools and like, maybe I can use this. The rusty old tools. Good for you. Well, I'm excited to read it. I will read it.
Well, we're going to hold him to that, right? I want you all to check in periodically. Text him directly. I'll give you his number.
Just as a little bit of an argument against the shame of my not having read it, because she beautifully inscribed it here, is I've never seen more book reviews.
Oh my God.
Ever, including Larry David, whose book review is so funny. This book is filled with wisdom that can help all of us, except me, do better, be better. I love him. And so many of our mutual friends, obviously all your friends in here, But yeah, I wasn't asked to review it. That's interesting.
Oh, yeah. There was
There's
that.
probably 4 pages of reviews in
There
there.
was-
I've never
let me-
seen that many.
Let me explain how that happened.
No, I mean, ridiculous complaint. But
I was really kind of freaked out about that part of it when they said you have to ask people for reviews. Like, it really, like, it...
Right, because you're shy and you don't know any...
Well,
you don't have any Hollywood connections.
I just don't like to do that. My job is to actually be in service to others. It's not to ask them for anything. Half of the people in here, I have witnessed countless times the phone calls, the requests.
Oh, sure.
Their entire life is
Fair.
about doing things for
But
others.
you never asked them. I'm sure they were happy to.
Well,
Because you never do. You don't misuse that.
I would never, on so many levels. But here, they're telling me you need to do this.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this is awful.
Yeah.
And so I finally just sucked it up, and I reached out. I reached out to everyone that I knew in that capacity, assuming, especially some of the clients, and they're like Larry David, for example, who loves me, who had been like, I love you and go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of prepared for 50% of those asks to not be responded to, and or just to tell me no, they're not doing it, which I would completely understand. 100%. Like within Larry David, like Geffen, like within minutes of me writing, responded, anything you need, let us know, when's the deadline?
By Geffen, you mean David Geffen, the billionaire, pioneering music. Yeah, okay, no big deal.
He immediately. And so I ended up having to print them all, because now I can't be like, sorry, Larry, you're not going to make the cut.
Oh, that's sweet.
So
That's totally what normal people do with books, though. They, cut half the reviews they get.
Oh, well.
They're like, oh, these are the coolest names.
I would never do that.
Yeah.
So that's why there's 4 pages of reviews, because anyone who took the time to read my book, maybe I knew that you weren't going to read my book, and that's why I was like,
if you tied my ego into getting a review along with Geffen and Larry David, who is my spirit animal, I worship
and even
him.
David Corn, who you're a fan of also, right?
I'm a fan of all. Congressman Tim Ryan.
Yes, no
Good times
relation
were
to me,
had.
though.
Yeah, that's right. Got to be clear about that. Well, anyway, thank you so much for the book. Seane Corn, delightful, beautiful. We are at time anyway. There's wonderful stories in here, which I love. It's not just pontificating, which also is helpful, but really beautiful, powerful stories. So thank you.
As you will find out.
As I will find out. Well, I've actually had the pleasure, I can only say that with a straight face, because I've had the pleasure of hearing some of the stories over the years. And now they're in a book.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. Seane, thank you so
Sir,
much.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
There are some
All right.
questions. If you
Oh, yeah,
There's
please.
questions.
There's some questions. Well, multiple
Yeah,
people
Facebook,
asked if you
the
have,
questions aren't showing, but
I can read a few.
Yeah.
But if you have any workshops or ways they can connect or take
just
classes
website,
with you.
yeah.
Yeah, my website.
Yeah.
But if anyone is going to read the book, what I can also recommend is on my website right now. They can download a free, like a book club guide that I wrote, and you don't even need it for a book guide. You can do it for yourself. But I went through each chapter and I tried to figure out what would be the best questions to ask yourself as you go through your own process, and so that you can be in relationship with people and kind of unpack this in a way that's more meaningful. And so if you want that, it's free. You can just download it, and I did it for every single chapter and subchapter.
And that's SeaneCorn.com, I assume?
SeaneCorn.com.
Yeah, so it's SeaneCorn.
Like the vegetable.
Corn like the vegetable.
Yeah. Which, by the way,
Yeah.
this is the one thing that everyone's been asking me about. Throughout the book, you'll see my, what are they called? Page breaks?
Oh, I don't remember. Yeah,
There's
but there is a cute little name for them.
There's page breaks that are these little triangles, these inverted triangles.
Yeah.
And on the side of my book
Yeah, it's beautiful.
is, again, these little triangles, and it's the logo, my logo, and it's also on these t-shirts I make, and everyone's been asking me all about these triangles, and they mean a lot of different things. But most significantly,
Corn?
they are an ancient indigenous
Hey.
symbol for corn. Yeah,
Right there.
that's the way.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of people thought that they had all sorts of spiritual, mystical meaning behind it, but
Well.
it's ancient indigenous symbol for corn.
Corn's pretty important stuff, historically.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you, Seane Corn.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So good to
Thank
have you in
you.
my home. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening.